In Concept 4.3, you will learn about another major challenge for organisms, keeping hydrated. In Germany, we always recognize people from the US because they all seem to walk around with huge water bottles. But of course, that's not an option for plants and animals. There are several forces acting on pulling water out of an organism. The main one is that water moves from its high concentration to its low concentration, or in other words, water moves from wet to dry. For plants and animals living on land, we call those terrestrial, it's because the air is usually drier than they are, so they would lose water quickly to the atmosphere if they did not have some kind of barrier, such as skin, or the cuticle, the waxy surface of plants, so seen here in these pine needles. And another fabulous adaptation for waterproofing, of course, is an egg. And eggs actually evolved to protect the embryo from the environment, from dehydration, so that the organism didn't have to produce it inside itself. Even though we have barriers, we still lose water, and we use water for metabolism, the chemical reactions within us. And so we need to constantly replace it, hence the water bottles and the need to water your plants. For organisms living in water, the challenge is a little bit different. If you took your goldfish, or koi, and threw it into the ocean, it would die very quickly because it is not adapted to the challenge of living in water that is more salty than its own cells. To understand the challenge, we need to understand osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water when solutes cannot move. This is all an attempt to gain equilibrium. So here you have a model of the cell. It has solutes, meaning substances that are dissolved in water, and they can't go out of the membrane, and that is true for a cell, but the water can come in. And you see what happens here. Water goes into this model cell through the selectively permeable membrane. Here in the left, we see an animal cell where the water has more salt than the cells. And what will happen is water will move out. We call that the solution outside is hypertonic, has more salt. The water will move out, and this poor koi would shrink. But there are situations where a cell is in a hypotonic environment, meaning that the cell has more salt than the water around it. And in that case, water would move into the cell and the cells would swell and eventually, as you can see here, burst. That doesn't happen in plant cells because they have cell walls that protect the cells from bursting. Well, if we apply that to another real life situation, if you took a fish that is adapted to live in an ocean like a tuna and you threw it into Lake Merced, then water would move into the fish and the fish would swell and die. There are very few species that can live in both freshwater and saltwater, and salmon, which live here in our Bay Area, are one such example. So they are born as eggs, or from eggs, in a creek, freshwater, and they spend about 2 years in freshwater, and then they move into the ocean, spend a couple of years there, and come back to their native creek to spawn. So that doesn't mean that you can take a little fry here and throw it in the ocean, because it would still die, because this is a major acclimatization that is necessary. So the whole workings of the fish change to make it from freshwater into saltwater, and that takes several months. Here in the bay, that poses a problem for the critters living in the bay. The bay is becoming more and more salty for two reasons. One is that we have global warming and sea level rising, and more water in high tides comes into the bay. And the other is that the fresh water that drains from the Sierras into the bay is less now, because about 40% of it is diverted for agriculture and water, drinking water. Have you ever wondered about this weird mosaic of colors that you can see at the southern edge of the bay when you fly into San Francisco? These are caused by microorganisms with unique adaptations to high salinity. Here is Dunadiella, that is green under certain salinity and becomes red in others. And then there is this weird halobacterium that looks pink. The key ideas to take home from this all is that different species are adapted to all kinds of conditions, like that halobacterium to very, very salty waters, but a particular species is adapted to only a narrow range of conditions. And the example here is the koi. If you take it from freshwater to saltwater, it will die. More about this in your textbook.